Well, hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, the Great Big Truck. It wasn't that long ago on the show that I brought you this project. And what this is it's a small parts drilling jig. In fact, a jig for drilling out the ends of dowels and giving you something to hold them with other than your hands. Now, I saw the pictures of this jig online, and they actually came from a book. And the author of that book is a gentleman by the name of S.G. DeVries. Now, as it turns out, this jig wasn't my design, so I contacted Mr. DeVries on his YouTube channel, and I was able to ask him, would he mind if I did the jig for the show? And you know what? The guy was kind enough to say, not at all. Make away and film all you like. But he even emailed me the pattern from his book for the thing, so I didn't have to muddle around. And I thought that was kind of cool. So the more that I looked into it, the more that I wanted to make the model that he designed. The model where that jig came from, the pattern for that jig came from. And that would be this book. And that is The Great Big Truck by S.G. DeVries. Now, let me get into the model here, and I want to show you some of the features of this before I talk anything about the book, because I know that you guys are here to see the model, and that's what you want to see. So let's do that part of the show first. Well, I haven't applied the finish to the model yet, but that's not going to stop me from going through it. The first thing that we're going to notice about this model right off the bat is its size. It is quite the chunky model. It's 11.5 roughly wide, 11 inches tall, and over 20 inches long. I think it's like 20.5, 21 inches long. It's constructed of a bunch of different species and a bunch of different types of wood. We have high-grade plywood for some of the gears and some of the cogs. We have walnut for a good majority of the parts. We have some hardwood dowels, some store-bought, some turned on the lathe. We have maple, we have poplar. I even snuck in some flame box elder into this build. There is a bunch of different species and types of woods, and they all come together to make what you see here. This thing is without a doubt a challenge to build. And let's just get into some of the features of it so that you can see what it is that is involved in this model, which actually, once you see what's involved in it, you'll understand how amazing the design is that's in this book. It's a feat of engineering for sure. Now, unlike most of my models, if not all of them, this one is meant to be played with. And what fun would a model be if you couldn't steer it? So the design incorporates at the back of the truck here, underneath the dump bed, it incorporates a large steering wheel. And that steering wheel, when driving this thing forward, acts as your steering. You can see there the tires going left and right. It's quite the feat of engineering. When you look up underneath it, you can see the rack and gear steering that allows this to work. There are actually two steering wheels here. You may notice that in the front, as I turn the rear steering wheel, there is a front steering wheel right here that also turns along with our rear one. And the purpose for this, you may be saying, what the heck, a steering wheel in the front? Well, yeah, because when the child or whoever, maybe it's me, is backing this thing in, you need to be able to steer the truck to back it in. So this was added, and it's a fantastic addition. I love the way that they connect. They actually connect on the inside of this with a steering shaft and a U-joint, a wooden U-joint that connects the two, that allows the steering shaft from the front to come down and angle up to come to the back. Now, you may notice that it's in the way here of the dump, or, you know, it could be in the way. Once I get into the dump mechanism, I'll show you exactly how the designer worked around that problem. Either way, the steering is just incredible. I love the way it works, and it really makes for a bunch of fun with this being able to be played with, that you can actually push it along and steer it. Now, aside from the steering wheels front and back that have functional steering, the front tires on this thing are unreal, and just by looking at them you wouldn't think there's anything special. They look just like the rear tires. The big difference here is that when these front tires spin, I don't know if you can see it on the video, but the center hub does not turn, whereas these ones here, the whole tire turns. Here we have a center hub out of this entire wheel, and all the way through, all the way around, are 3/8 diameter dowels that act as roller bearings for these front wheels. And because of that, they turn smooth as silk, and they kind of give a cool kind of a clacking sound. So either way, it's again just, the design build could have been just to slap the wheels on and have them as a solid feature, but instead the bearings are just unreal as far as engineering goes and the way it's held together. And it's just another one of the cool features of this model that, unless you see it in person or here on the show, the pictures that I put on Facebook just don't do it justice. Well, there is absolutely no shortage of gears and sprockets that go into this model. And what we're looking at here is actually the rear differential of the truck. Now, again, the designer could have just gone with a straight through axle to have both tires turning at the same rate. But what he's allowed for here is a differential where if we lock the one set of tires, you can see that I have one set held, and the differential spins to allow them to turn in different directions. This, in fact, allows them to turn at different rates while the truck is turning. And if the truck is just going along straight and not having an issue, well, the whole diff turns around, and the gear that is there here on the left-hand side turns the drive shaft. But it's just a cool little thing. This is quite the challenge to get this working, and it's not so much cutting the gears for me as it was being able to file them and sand them in order for the gears to mesh perfectly like this at 90 degrees. Again, quite the feat of engineering, and unnecessary, 100% unnecessary on the model. But if you can do it, why wouldn't you? And that's what S.G. DeVries has done here. He's designed this. Why? Just because he can. This thing is awesome. Well, I flipped the model upside down so that you can see some of the gears and the inner workings here. Here we see our differential. This is our main drive gear, and this here is our drive shaft. Now, truth be told, when I made the drive shaft and I originally put it in, I made it as per the pattern, and I was having issues. And then I thought that I had the gears meshing properly, but then at some point in time after the model was completed, after all the Facebook posts, I just wasn't happy with the way that this rear drive shaft gear was meshing with the axle gear. It just wasn't working as well as I wanted it to. So I actually ended up cutting out the drive shaft, and you can see right here I've added a 3/4 inch diameter, almost like a coupling, a sliding coupling. And I did that in order to replace the drive shaft from here back. And I had to do that in order to replace this gear. So before I went through any of that trouble, I actually ended up cutting a new gear to replace this one, but not on the truck. I was going to leave this one stationary and then replace this one here. This is just a test model that I could hook up another gear to get the shaping and the meshing quite right. Now, in the book, in the rear, it is provided that there are different number of teeth in the gears that you can try to mesh with. And truth be told, the original just wasn't working for me. So I ended up using a 19 tooth back here. So the bottom line is, if things aren't meshing for you, if you try to do this for yourself, don't be afraid to try other gear sizes. And as well, I can't stress enough, unless you want a stressful afternoon of cutting out drive shafts, test everything perfectly before you continue on with the build. For me, I thought it was working well, and then it wasn't until everything was said and done that I realized it wasn't. But we can see here how that drive shaft just turns beautifully, and that spins all the way up to the front here. So what is the purpose of that drive shaft spinning like that? Well, that controls our front crankshaft, and that crankshaft actually controls the engine pistons. The model is still upside down, and we can see here, this is actually the tensioner of the chain. In here we can see hopefully a very small wooden chain. It's very similar to these ones back here, it's just a smaller scale. And as our drive shaft is rotated, that rotates our chain up here. And that chain connects to a cam. That cam, you can see hopefully that chain turning in there, and what that does is it turns these cams which allow the pistons on the top end of the truck. And inside the engine compartment we can see a couple of the pistons here. There's actually 4 here and 4 on the other side. And as the differential and as the rear axle turns, those pistons go up and down to show the engine working. Now I'm turning this slowly here, but you get the idea. As the child plays with it, these pistons go up and down as the engine works. Just another little cool detail feature. I love it. Now, while we're talking about the cab, let's talk about our driver. Now, the driver really reminds me of me. Why? Because he's bloody adorable. Now, I've made mine out of flame box elder here. I turned this on the lathe. It's much different than what the original designer's model was like. And in fact, there were more details in the cab that the designer had. And to be honest, no offense meant to the designer, I just didn't like it. So I did my own design and my own driver here as far as the front end of the cab goes. With this little guy, in the original design, this guy is meant to come out. Mine can rotate, but he cannot be removed. I didn't want him getting lost. So he can look left or right to check his blind spot and when he's backing in and that sort of thing. But other than that, he is a stationary or a permanent addition to the truck. My point here is that you don't have to do everything just because the plans say so. If there's something that you want to change, do that. And not only with the driver, but it also shows with the headlights of my version of this truck. Now, in the original design, these headlights here were only meant to be cut off dowels, and I just didn't like the look of them. So, of course, I bored mine out and ended up putting in wooden plugs on the inside to simulate the lamps of the headlights. So for me, this worked better. I mean, if you're building this model, you can do it however you like, but just again, it's another instance where you don't need to be afraid to change certain model designs. You can always add your own thing. And that's what I've done with this and the driver, and I'm happy with the way both of those turned out. While we have the truck in this position, looking at the front, I just want to show you the front bumper. Serves 2 purposes. The first purpose is, of course, a bumper, but the second one, and quite possibly one of the coolest features of the build, is the fact that this thing is also the mechanism which raises the bucket. An absolutely an ingenious design, and let me show you how it works. Well, in order to really appreciate how it works, we'll lift this up and I will remove the bucket. I'd like to point out that there's enough friction here in the entire assembly that it stays up on its own, so you don't have to worry about little fingers getting pinched down in here as they're playing with it and having that heavy bucket come dropping down on them. So that's a nice little feature. But let's remove the bucket and you can get a better idea of what's going on in here. So the first thing that you want to do in order to remove the bucket is you want to remove the retaining pins. And you can see them. There's one right here and there's one right here. So if we just pop them out, they're not glued in, and they're not glued in for a reason. The reason being, this way you can remove the bucket. So if you just pull out those two pins, the bucket just lifts off the assembly. That's it. It is now taken off and the child can play with it without the bucket if they want. But by removing the bucket, it also provides us a view of the inner workings. And they are quite, you're probably tired of hearing me say it, but they're quite the feat of engineering. This handle, or bumper, is connected to a shaft which has a couple of sprockets on it. Those sprockets control these two large chains. Now, these chains alone are one heck of a challenge to build. They're basically a wooden bicycle chain and very time consuming, but just a load of fun. And as this thing rotates, you can see it pulling the chain along. That controls gears on the underside of the truck. And those gears, as the handle is rotated down, you can see them turning. The chain sprockets underneath control these gears, which in turn turn these gears, which in turn are connected to these racks. Now these racks are connected internally to these piston assemblies. And through inside gears over here and an opening to attach to the rack, you can see where this gear spins and it drives along here on this rack to raise the mechanism up. Now, truth be told, in my build, I built a first set of pistons, and then after I built the first set, I really didn't like the way that it worked. And it was my own fault. I ended up deviating from the pattern and kind of misinterpreting some things, and I built them my own way, and by doing that I lost an inch of height on the lift. So because of that, I ended up scrapping them, and they became some designer kindling in my wood stove, and I built the new ones. And I'm much happier with the way they work and with the way that they give me that extra inch of lift for the bucket to play with. But all in all, that is just one heck of a design here between the wooden chains and the gears and the sprockets. It's just incredible. And as well, with the bucket removed, we can also get a much better look at these pistons here. There's two here, and there's two more in the front of each section. So all in all, just a wicked design, just a load of fun there, and I love the way that it functions. It's flawless. Now, I mentioned earlier though about the steering wheel, and I just want to show you the action of what happens with the steering wheel when we lift the bucket up. Now, I just want you to keep an eye on the position of that steering wheel and what happens to it as we raise the bucket. You see how that connects there? You see how that dips down? The weirdest part is, check this out, look at it turn. It's still functioning. It's still functional. How is that possible? Well, it's possible by a series of gears joined at 90 degrees. And those gears allow the entire mechanism to pivot with our bucket and still keep their functionality through the gears that they are connected to. They go all the way to the front of the truck, and they still function even with the bucket up. It's just amazing the thought that went into the entire steering mechanism of this truck. Now, putting the bucket back on is a pretty easy process. there are pieces, guide blocks down here, which allow you to line it up perfectly every time, and it will sit there by itself. But now you don't want to trust it with that. Of course, that's why the pins are there. So all you need to do, you have it there on its guide blocks, you line it up and slide your pins through the bracket and into the retaining area here, or the socket, and now your bucket is right back to where it was, connected to the truck. It's that easy. Even a child could do it. Well, I guess it's time to talk about the book itself. Guys, before any of you ask, no, I did not get this book for free. I paid for it. I bought it off of Amazon, and I will place a link to it down below, and it was worth every penny I paid. It's a reasonably priced book. It's over 300 pages. I think it's 301 to be exact, but still over 300. And it is full of photographs and explanations and cut lists and patterns, descriptions. It is just incredible. It leaves basically nothing to chance. It tells you all the way along exactly what to do and what steps to take. It tells you when to glue, when not to glue. It tells you basically everything you need to know. I just want to show you here another example of how you don't necessarily have to follow the design of the book. S.G. DeVries wanted his tires like this. Two halves that have two treads. I wanted mine a little more detailed, so I actually did, instead of 2 3/4 inch thick sections, I did 4 3/8 inch thick sections and reversed the treads to get a more aggressive looking tire. It was just a little extra detail that I added as well, and you guys can do the same. If you're going to make this model, you don't have to follow what the designer does. You can add your own little things as long as it doesn't change the overall function or structure of the model. And adding extra tire treads added nothing but a little extra kind of look to it. But either way, this book, as I said, is very well done. You can see I've highlighted stuff and I've got my own measurements scribbled through here because that's the way I like to do things. So this book is full of now not only the designer's notes, but my notes as well. So whoever ends up getting this book down the road is going to have basically a cut above instructions scribbled in there as well. All in all, it's just a great book. I really enjoyed that. And there you have it. The Great Big Truck by S.G. DeVries. Guys, this all started out as a Facebook post. For those of you who don't know, the channel has a Facebook page. And if you have Facebook or you have an account connected to Facebook, you may want to check it out because sometimes there are things that don't make the show, much like this model. Some things I do just for me, but I was posting it on there as well as on my personal page, and I had so many people ask me, can we get a video of how it works and what it does and that sort of thing, that hence this show was born. I'm going to post a link down below to the Facebook channel as well as the album, which has all of the photos from the build. For those of you who are interested in the step-by-step photos or the process, it's all there, all my work, all my mess-ups, they're all there, photographic evidence. But feel free to check it out if that's the sort of thing that interests you. This book it blows my mind when I think of the process of what it must take to design something like this. I know what it took me to build. I only work on the weekends, and this took me 12 weeks. 12 weeks, a total of 200 hours. So there you go. But then again, I have extensive model building experience. So a lot of these procedures were old hat, and some of them, you know what? I have my own procedures that I do, which brings me to my next point. The author of this book gives the way that he likes to do things, and I find it interesting because his methods in a lot of cases are very different than mine, and it shows with things like cutting the chain links and cutting the gears and cutting the sprockets and that sort of thing. The author likes to use a bandsaw and then shape it afterwards. That's not my style. You guys know what I'm all about, and for me, I prefer the scroll saw. So I probably knocked a whackload of hours off of my build just by cutting pieces with the scroll saw. Things like the side tire retainers for the bearings and that sort of thing, all cut with the scroll saw, all stack cut, so I was doing 3 at a time. It just worked out in my favor, and that's my style. Now, there's nothing wrong with doing the bandsaw method. It obviously works, and if that's what suits you, then that's what suits you. And that's the great thing about our hobby, is that for every process, there's probably 10 ways that you can do it to get the same final result. So pick and choose what it is that you want to do. As long as it's safe, no one's to say that you're wrong. All in all, this was a challenge. I'm not going to lie to you. This was not an easy build. There were several frustrating things, and a lot of them circled and revolved around the gears. It is a finicky process, but if you take your time and just go through it and you know, step by step, bit by bit, don't go crazy and file off too much at once, just a little bit at a time, you'll eventually get a functioning working model, and you'll be very pleased with it. This thing is awesome, and from someone who has designed a few things and has a habit of overbuilding, I got to give it to this guy. He is the king of overbuilding, but oh my gosh, what an awesome overbuild. Guys, I'm going to post the link down below for this book. If you are so inclined, feel free to get yourself one. You will not regret it. It is a fun build. It's absolutely spectacular. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Click that bell so that you don't miss the notifications of future episodes of the show. I hope you've enjoyed today's content. I hope you've had a little bit of fun here. This was a blast. A long time coming, but I really enjoyed it. I hope you're going to try this one for yourself, guys. If you want a challenge, this is the one for you. And more importantly, I honestly hope that you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another Alternative Tuesday.